Aquilo, Season 9, Chapter 10, What the Old Witch Teaches. Camping isn't my thing. Not that I mind roughing it when I have to, but I don't crave the mud, sweat, and grime of living outdoors. Being a cook, I'm also conditioned to strive for cleanliness. Give me the well-lived-in kitchen for my sanctum and personal cooking. I yearn for herbs hanging from the windowsill, the well-used pots and pans, and that smell of 1,000 meals hanging through the air like ghosts lingering. I hunger for those little details like a chipped tile on the floor and a few regretful scratches on an otherwise pristine countertop. A kitchen with a personality has its place, and I can't imagine life without one. However, when it comes to professional cooking, to making meals for others or ones that require a greater level of organization and order, give me an industrial kitchen. Sterile and soulless as it may be with its endless stainless steel surfaces and metal utensils, I can't fault the efficiency and precision of that sort of cooking environment. The outdoors provide neither of these things. Dirt, insects, pollen all get into your ingredients. Wind makes it difficult to keep leafy greens and spices in place, and everything I touch soils my hands. I understand that there's something about cooking over a campfire, but I find the lack of control of the temperature frustrating, the lack of even surfaces grating, and that's not even mentioning the abhorrent absence of counter space. Once I tried. The summer before I started my studies at the Institute, Dad decided the whole family would go camping. To his credit, this was the one time he'd come to terms with who his family had shaped up to be. This was the summer he'd finally accepted his gay son, his weird food-obsessed daughter, and the many other changes he'd endured over the previous decades. And how did he decide to celebrate? By dragging us all into the woods for a week, of course. Dad had it all figured out, too. He'd get to do manly bonding with his man-loving, muscly man of a son while chopping wood and fishing in the river. He bought a fancy set of camping pots that stack neatly one inside the other like a Russian doll, a state-of-the-art camping stove, and struggled for 30 minutes to fit a folding table along with everything else into the back of his Volvo V70 station wagon. Of course, it all went to hell almost immediately. Park rules prohibited cutting down any trees, so we had to buy firewood. Late in the summer, the river was shallow and murky and not at all pleasant to fish in. As for me, despite Dad dropping good money on everything he thought I would need to cook gourmet meals in the forest, I had a miserable time making even the basics. It took a few days to figure out how to make the stove work for my style of cooking, and I eventually sort of got the hang of roasting things over an open flame, but this was not the chef's experience I was longing to learn from the Institute. In spite of it all, we did manage to make the trip worthwhile. Eric took the time to teach Dad how to properly exercise, which, in the long run, we can credit for keeping the old man as healthy as he is despite everything. Mom and I took long walks through the forest, and she taught me to recognize some of the mushrooms we encountered along the way, even pointing out the very few that were edible. I didn't know my mother was such a mycologist before then. It was never really brought up again, but I did cherish the experience. 3 times a day we gathered together to see my progress adapting to outdoor cuisine, and I took the compliments as they grew in sincerity throughout the trip. In the end, I was thankful for the experience, grateful I got to stretch my skills in a hostile and dirty environment, but also quietly promising myself that I would never try to cook in the woods again. Standing now, as I do, in the clearing north of Aquilo, I'm faced with the echoes of that experience expressed 100-fold. For reasons all her own, this is where Philomene Dufour has decided to make camp. As the year slips deeper into winter and the weather steals warmth and life from trees and soil alike, she walks around her little clearing without a jacket or shawl and barely an ounce of fat to protect her bones. It takes a moment for me to notice, but even her feet are bare, her soles stained with black sod and caked with mud. Around her is a nightmare assortment of cookware and utensils, an outdoor kitchen assembled from cobbled-up tools, stolen or salvaged from a variety of different origins. I can spot one of the saucepans that had gone missing from the Aquilo after her resurrection, and I see a set of spatulas and spoons resting atop a folding table not unlike the one Dad had bought on our camping trip.
If you've come to accept my teachings and grow into a proper Dufour witch under my wing,
she says, her fingers gesticulating as if plucking the words from thin air,
you should know my offer was for you and you alone.
Her cold blue eyes fixate on something over my shoulder as her head cocks to the side at an uncomfortable angle. Gulliver. I can almost feel the warmth of my massive friend battling against Philomene's chilling presence. There's more to it than that, I realize. The duality between comforting familiarity and an empty, unpredictable horizon is made manifest between these two. I'm here to make sure Miriam is safe, Gulliver bellows, stepping to my side and puffing out his chest. For a brief moment, I wonder what the balance of power is between the two. I've seen firsthand how potent Philomene's magic can be. While I can't vouch for her cooking, she clearly has a mastery of kitchen magic that goes far beyond my own. At a glance, however, she's still just a frail old lady. She looks like every bone in her body would shatter if she tripped on a stray root. If someone of Gulliver's size were to get a hand on her, she'd likely turn to dust between his fingers. What would she do against that? You can't bake your way out of a violent altercation, can you?
Of course you are,
Philomene says, unfazed.
And what a brave little soldier, too. Ready to lay down your life to defend your friend from a frail old lady. Never letting on that maybe you're more of a threat to her than I will ever be?
Gulliver bristles. Stepping forward, he clenches his fists, and I can feel the irritation scratching at his bones. My mind interprets it as more heat emanating from him. I don't want to see my friend mad. It's an image I've witnessed before, and the memories of him breaking his hand over my counter are a vile aftertaste I'd rather not experience anew. Even Philomene seems to recognize that there is a material threat in pushing Gulliver over the edge. While she exudes confidence, steepling her fingers with her thumbs pointing up, she steps back, keeping her distance from my behemoth companion. While not a pugilist or a fighter, I know Gulliver can translate his raw strength into action faster than most would give him credit. Smart of Philomene to recognize that.
Easy there, my friend,
Philomene smiles, showing used and aging teeth.
You wouldn't want that tightly held control to slip, would you?
There's a familiarity to my ancestor's voice that belies unexpected knowledge. Knowledge that I lack. Her lips tighten and her smile broadens as Gulliver pulls at the collar of his shirt as if it were suddenly too tight for his comfort. I've seen this before.
Stop it,
I demand, calm but struggling to keep a handle on my nerves. It's also a conscious choice to stay close to Gulliver. I'm here to talk. There's a long second during which Philomene seems to study me, digging into my features for the subtext to my words. Furtive looks in Gulliver's direction betray that she's not forgotten about him entirely and that maybe he is a threat to her. Maybe the old witch isn't as all-powerful as I've made her out to be. With one final glance at my friend, she turns around to walk back to her makeshift kitchen. Her display of confidence is almost flawless. Posture straight, and without looking back once, she keeps her pace slow and controlled.
"You've come to learn, then,"
she says, picking up a vicious-looking old chef's knife between her bony fingers. She runs the tip of her thumb over its edge, testing how sharp it is. Again, I recognize myself there, turning to my kitchen utensils when I once thought of Gulliver as a threat.
"But we wouldn't want your big friend to go back and talk about this arrangement to the young Sarajo girl, now would we?"
Only now does the old crone look over her shoulder, not at me, but at Gulliver. There's a menacing thirst in her eyes reflected into the blade she wields. The implied suggestion weaving itself through my imagination doesn't last, however. "Miriam," Gulliver says, a sudden fear in his voice. "We should go."
"Please,"
Philomen says, turning to face us again, waving the knife in the air as one might a wand or a spoon.
"Stay, I insist. And don't worry, my large friend. I mean you and your little girlfriend no harm for now. I have no desire to spill more of her family's blood. As for you, well, we both know you could be chewing on my innards before I even got a single cut into you, don't we?"
Gulliver steps back, as if her words are more of a threat than her blade. Reluctantly, I turn to look at him, and where I expect to see anger or perhaps confusion, there's only the cold fear of understanding in his big liquid eyes. His shirt looks like it's positively choking him.
"Let us then strike a bargain, young man,"
Philomen says, tapping the flat of her blade in the palm of her free hand, pondering the terms of her deal.
"You keep those pretty sharp fangs in your mouth and that tongue of yours very, very still, and not only will you live, but I'll do something for you in exchange."
The cold hand of December has recoiled from Philomen's home in the forest. Like a child touching a hot stove, the frosty fingers of early winter have pulled away, leaving only a broiling heat in their place. It's Gulliver. Something about Philomen's presence, or perhaps her words, is provoking him, the same way he was provoked when he smashed his hand on my counter. That night, something about our friendship broke, shattering like so many of the bones in his fist. Except, instead of cracking upon impact with my counter, our relationship fractured on the topic of Ophelia. The heat radiating from his skin forces a step back from me, or is it the memory of the violence I saw him capable of that night? Beads of sweat grow like condensation on his smooth head, trickling down his face like so many tears. His eyes, wide and unblinking, are focused entirely on Philomen, but where I expect fury or anger, all I see is fear. The old woman assured him that she poses no threat, yet their dynamic is reversed. She walks forward, barefoot over soil and roots, with the assurance of a predator approaching its prey. Meanwhile, Gulliver is choked by his clothes, crushed under the knitting of his sweater, and about ready to bolt like a hare.
"Even the Sarajo's magic struggles and strains against it,"
she says, reaching out to take Gulliver's trembling hand. The contrast between the two is so much more accentuated by their proximity. Gulliver's palm is nearly large enough to cover all of Philomen's face, and he could probably wrap most of his fingers around her skeletal waist. He is a giant, trembling in the presence of a shrew.
"Oh, it runs deep, this corruption,"
she continues, inspecting every finger, looking under his nails for dirt and guilt.
"Have you succumbed? How much blood have these hands spilled?
None. Gulliver backs away, pulling his hand to his chest and clutching it close. Again, the tableau is a mirror of that horrible night. He cradles the same hand, but while unbroken this time, it's with no less pain and distress. Leave him alone, I say, stepping forward, my own fists clutched tight. The heat between the two is like a freshly open oven, except instead of the smell of fresh croissants or sugary cookies, it's that of rotten, burnt flesh that fills my nostrils. It's the stench of anger, of wrath. I can feel it, too, deep inside my breast. Not only the capacity towards violence, but the desire for it. The muscles in my arms ache with longing. Not only am I ready to come to blows with Philomen in defense of my friend, but I want it. The satisfying sound of her cracking jaw, reminiscent of my buckling countertop as my knuckles connect, is as inviting as lemonade during a heat wave. Oh, to see her nose explode with blood, her teeth shatter like broken china.
Now,
Philomen says, looking over my shoulder at Gulliver.
look what you're doing to little Miriam. Is that what you want? Aren't you tired of carrying that burden?
Old, nimble fingers make the knife dance in front of her like a conductor's wand. She waves the blade with practiced ease, using the tip to accentuate her every word. Not threatening, but a reminder that the edge is there, and we're all living on it.
Abide my demands,
Philomen explains, her eyes narrowing as she focuses harder on Gulliver.
and you can go home unleashed, your muzzle removed and your fangs blunt. You can return to young Ophelia, a safe, domesticated version of yourself. Imagine her relief. Imagine your own.
There's a history I'm missing here, like an appetizer that's key to a meal's theme. Whatever it is Philomen is teasing Gulliver about, it's eating him up from the inside out. The more he restrains himself from lashing out, the more insistent the witch's promises. What secret has he been keeping? What does it have to do with Ophelia? I burn to know, if only because these mysteries have the same shape as the rift that's defined our friendship in the last years. Like the silhouette of a key to a lock that's become all too familiar. Cooking has taught me many things, not the least of them being patience. I know not to open the oven too soon when baking a soufflé, no matter how curious or worried I am about the results. Clearly upset, there's no telling what Gulliver might do if pushed even further. Come on, I urge, reaching to take his arm. You don't have to take this. It takes all my strength and most of my weight, but I manage to get him to take a step back, and then another. Try as I might, however, I cannot get him to take a third. Looking back, I see his eyes have not left Philomen. Meanwhile, my ancestor is busy not looking at the man she was teasing, but at me. Behind her, a primitive kitchen. Half for cooking and half for conjuring, it's an eclectic mix of old and contemporary. Items borrowed, stolen, or salvaged, she's managed to put together a fascinating assortment of utensils and cookware. Is this where she expects me to learn her ways, using these primitive, improvised tools? Come on, I say, giving another yank to Gulliver's arm, but he doesn't budge. Instead, he tenses even more, and I half expect his muscles to rip through the sleeves of his sweater, and then perhaps even his own skin. It's like having my fingers wrapped around an overinflated tire that's ready to explode. His right foot twists, digging into the dirt and solidifying his stance. I would have better luck pulling an oak out of the soil than dragging Gulliver out of the forest at this point. Whatever it is, I beg, we can work it out without her, please. Watching the anguish consume my friend's face, I forget all about the promises Philemon's teachings might fulfill. Ian's faith, Thomas's hunger, Death's threats, even Nisha's life become blurry goals in the face of Philemon's hold on Gulliver. "You can't," he says, a fist closing on the fabric of his shirt. "Doris did her best until she died. Ophelia's solution's a stopgap measure at best. Duct tape over a broken windshield." He holds up his hands, looking at his fingers as if discovering them anew. I can see shallow gashes where his fingernails have dug into the skin of his palm. Yet he doesn't tremble, holding himself steady, studying his extremities with awe. "You know better than anyone what can happen if I ever slip up," he continues, turning to me and offering up his hand, the one he broke over my countertop. The pieces are starting to come together, and I don't like the image they're beginning to form. Gulliver swallows hard and turns back to Philemon. The witch has been watching us, amused as one might be by a corny soap opera or a family dispute. Slender arms crossed, still holding on to her wicked knife. Sharp, but not as sharp as her smile. "You have a deal, Madame Dufour." Gulliver tries his best to sound official, but that only draws a laugh out of the old witch. In most contexts, it might sound mirthful, but after what she put Gulliver through, I see nothing but cutting malice.
"Philemon will do,"
she says, flipping the knife between her fingers until she's holding it by the blade.
"You and I will have become very well acquainted if we're going to pull you through this, son. Now, show me."
Holding the blade between index finger and thumb, she offers the knife to Gulliver. Her chin is held high despite giving up her only real weapon. What if my friend goes through with Ophelia's demand? What if he takes the knife and uses it to kill the old witch? Or perhaps even do it with his bare hands, as Philemon suggested he could?
"Show us,"
she insists. Carefully, Gulliver wraps his massive fingers around the handle. Looks like a paring knife in his grasp, and he waits for Philemon to let go before moving his hand again. He looks at his own reflection in the metal of the blade. After a moment, he twists his wrist, and I can see his eyes, knowing he can see mine too. "I'm sorry," he says. "I should have told you earlier." With a deft twist of his arm, he flips the knife around in his hand. Then, before I have any time to react, he bends over, grabbing the cuff of his pants. The sharp edge of the knife pierces through the dark blue denim, then down to slice the seam open. What would have been a struggle for most, Gulliver does with little effort. Dropping the knife, he closes fists around opposite pieces of fabric and pulls. The sound of ripping jeans cuts through the forest, like an animal ripping through the flesh of a kill. My breath leaves my body in one long, deflating exhale. My lungs empty, my rib cage still struggles to press them down. Every other muscle in my body goes numb, and I struggle to stay standing up. Gulliver's exposed left leg is like nothing I've seen before. "It's been getting worse since Doris's passing," he explains, perhaps to me, perhaps to Philemon. "Ophelia's been trying, but even she can barely keep the curse contained." There's a tear in his outer thigh, a whole piece carved out of the muscle. No, not carved. Bitten. Burned. As if a vicious animal chewed through his flesh right down to the bone before the wound was cauterized with cruel flames. The gash looks as fresh as one of Olivia's apples, yet it does not bleed. Instead, it's an anatomical showcase of his leg's interior. Muscles singed and glistening, flexing under his every move. Sinews pulling absent-mindedly, adjusting to the efforts of his stance. A leg like this should not be functional, nor should it still be attached. How long has he had this? Since Doris's death? before that? The horror must register on my face too plainly as Gulliver turns his eyes from mine. Is it shame at the unnatural wound, or that he hid it at all? Whichever it is, the truth is out, along with questions too numerous to sort through right now. This moment isn't about clarity for me, but salvation for him. Where I find myself horrified, Philomen is fascinated. Like a child seeing tigers at the zoo after only reading about them in picture books. Her arms draw close to her chest, hands tucked underneath her sharp chin as she leans in for a closer look. The spark in her eyes burns like a star, and I can see her tongue glide slowly over her lower lip.
"Oh,"
she says, hungry with curiosity.
"It got you good, didn't it?"
Yeah, Gulliver chuckles, a nervous echo of his usual guttural laugh. But you should see the other guy.
"I wish I could,"
Philomen says, looking up with a mischievous smile.
"But I suspect there's not much left of it, is there?"
Hiking her skirt, Philomen sits on her heel to get an even closer look at the wound. She wrinkles her nose at the smell, but the aroma of burnt flesh has subsided since Gulliver calmed down. Carefully, she puts a calming hand on Gulliver's knee, then gently uses her fingers to pull apart some of the flesh and muscles. Like a surgeon, she exposes more of the thigh bone. There, embedded inside the meat and partially jammed into the femur, is what looks to be another bone. No, not a bone. A fang. A massive demonic fang. The walk back from the forest is a quiet one. Far too quiet for my taste. I would far prefer Gulliver's habitual verbosity, either to offer clarity about what he revealed about himself, or at the very least to drown out the questions bouncing inside my skull. Instead, my large friend seems lost in his own thoughts, unusually silent and contemplative. Occasionally, he'll toss a furtive glance in my direction. When I catch his eye, there's only so much I manage to read there. There's fear, of course, but also complicity. Philomen did not keep us much longer after confirming her diagnosis of Gulliver. She said she would need a day to concoct a salve that would more efficiently ease Gulliver's torment, but it might take weeks to find a more permanent solution. It was made clear that I would be part of that research, and that would serve for my training. That's from whence the complicity grows. Walking downhill towards the village of Aquilo, both of us carry a promise. We've both, for our own reasons, struck a deal with the witch Philomen Dufour. The cold has returned with a vengeance, and I long to be back at the cafe, hot cocoa between my fingers. I'm not sure I'll find much comfort in its flavor, but the warmth will certainly be welcome. I look down at Gulliver's leg. A poor attempt was made to mend his pant leg and hide his wound. It won't hold and will not survive scrutiny, but hopefully he makes it back to his truck before that becomes an issue. We make it down the street and in front of Ian's house without a word exchanged. He didn't wait, and neither of us has any desire to ring his doorbell again. The day has slipped by, and even through the thick cloud covering, I can tell the afternoon is growing old. Frigid air and the call of responsibility hastens my pace, but Gulliver has no difficulty keeping up. "Customers are not going to be happy," I say, voice cracking from lack of use. My throat is drier and my jaw more tired than I realized. The exhaustion spreads to my muscles and I'm suddenly hit with the weight of the day. Between the ER and the forest, I smell of dead leaves and disinfectant. Not at all the appealing flavors of Aquilo's best eatery. It takes a moment for Gulliver to react. The distant hum of the village carries through the streets, and the sound of our footsteps on asphalt are the only answer I receive for a long while. Only once I'm in the middle of deciding whether to insist or leave the poor guy alone does he finally break the silence. "If they're anything like me," he says, turning to look down at me with a forced smile, "they'll just be happy to eat pastries and drink coffee." It's selfish, I know, to quietly demand that he make the effort of putting on the facade and reassure me that everything is fine, or at least fine enough to play pretend. There will be time for questions and answers later, once he feels ready to talk. Meanwhile, I'll juggle with theories and assumptions. At least now, the bandage has been ripped off and the initial shock is behind us. The wound, real and metaphorical, is out for us to contemplate and discuss. There are no lines in front of the Aquilo Cafe. It's too late for people to nurse any hope that I'll open. If Stefan showed up, and there's no reason to believe he didn't, he must have gone home. Without my prepared dishes and freshly baked brioche and cupcakes, there's little he could do for customers anyway. The odd villager that passes in front of the door does slow down to peer inside, less hopeful than curious for any clue as to why the cafe's doors remain locked and its lights dark. We walk through the threshold, and I flip on all the lights from the dining room to the kitchen, announcing to the world that the Aquilo is alive and accepting customers. It'll take a moment for me to put things in the oven and for the smell to waft through the streets and summon customers, but that siren song is but minutes from being sung. "Ophi's not going to like this," Gulliver says, dropping his massive weight onto a stool at the counter. The furniture creaks under the assault, but holds still. Take a moment to ponder this sudden declaration. What does he need me to answer to this? Am I supposed to offer help or just comfort for this fatalistic trial? Prepared cookie dough waits in the fridge to be put in the oven. I have no croissants, but there is a box of day-old bagels waiting to be added to the pastry display. If I scramble, I can have some semblance of a menu ready for the evening crowd.
Didn't you just agree not to tell her anything?
Through the kitchen door, I can see half the counter, including the spot where Gulliver is sitting. He's running his finger over the wooden countertop. The pride of my dining room after the cafe got trashed 3 years ago, that slab of wood has since seen its share of woes. It's not hard to guess what my friend is studying with so much care. It's the indentation. The spot where he broke his hand, hitting the countertop with so much force that it nearly cracked. "She'll figure it out," he says, not a drop of doubt in his voice. "And she's going to be pissed, Miriam. So pissed." I walk back to the counter, carrying a cutting board loaded with everything I need to prepare a massive salad. Heirloom tomatoes, cucumbers, red onions, all destined to be diced and mixed in with some quinoa alongside a generous helping of chopped feta cheese. Then I'll add my own vinaigrette, the final incantation in my little culinary spell. "I bet. You could have picked a less murderous girlfriend. I'd offer you a couch to sleep on, but I don't think I want to stand between the two of you." The vegetables are cut, assembled temporarily into a large metal bowl. I contemplate the coffee machine for a moment, feeling the leathery pull of my new scar. I've been hesitant to use the beast since the accident, but what's a cafe without coffee? Steeling myself, I start brewing a fresh pot. "She's cute," he says, almost as if confessing some long-held sin. "And she makes me laugh."
Ophelia. Our Ophelia? I didn't even know she had a sense of humor.
I dodge a jet of burning steam. It's small and half-hearted, as if the machine didn't have the will to do more than put on a show. Coffee begins to percolate, the welcome gurgle singing us promise of a well-deserved cup. "And she's not as murderous as she makes herself out to be." That last statement is a little more difficult for him to say, as if he knows it isn't entirely true. We both heard her demand the head of Philemon, whether we claimed it as a group or as a trophy she would earn herself. If Ophelia does have a sense of humor, it was not on display when she requested that we kill the old witch. The oven rings, calling me to the kitchen so I can feed it raw cookie dough. In exchange, it will give me back 24 freshly baked classic chocolate chip delights. It feels so mundane. Chopping vegetables, baking cookies, brewing coffee. Yet I feel more myself doing these simple tasks than I have since leaving the Aquilo Cafe this morning. The witches and death and curses and magic have become heavy. It feels good to enjoy the simple pleasures of the kitchen, like going back to the arms of an old flame. So cozy is the feeling that I allow myself to luxuriate in it for a moment, closing my eyes and letting all of my other senses savor the instant. The lingering dry heat of the oven dissipating now that I've closed its door. The sweet smell of sugars still tickling my nostrils from the sheet of cookies now baking. Even the slick juices of cucumbers and tomatoes drying at the tip of my fingers, a tactile reminder that I am in my element. I could have stayed there for hours, not in blissful silence with my eyes shut, but in the kitchen. To feel my muscles ache as I knead bread, or to hear the sizzling of meat in a pan and the bubbling of sauce reducing on the stove. I long to crack open recipe books, to mince garlic, to pipe buttercream. I want to feel the embrace of passion and let it shield me from the realities of Aquilo, if only for a little while. But my daydream and reverie is rudely interrupted by a thunderous banging. Not from outside where the raccoons might be up to shenanigans. Not from the streets where cars might have collided. Not even from the dining room where Gulliver maybe dropped something. Instead, the noise came from the one place that should be empty and safe. It came from my apartment upstairs. Aquilo is written by J.F. Dubeau and narrated and produced by me, Amy Frost. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast platform. Want to support the show? Buy us a coffee. Go to ko-fi.com/Aquilo to donate. Aquilo has a Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Aquilo for details. Follow us on Facebook, Blue Sky, and Instagram under the username Aquilo.